Gary asked me to talk about being chaplain to the Canberra Raiders, and I've got the advantage you won't be able to find a job description online or anywhere. Maybe some history and then a bit of a feel, and as I'm moving on, if there's a question or comment, please interject as you will. Just some background will help understand how I got involved. I'm originally from New Zealand. Don't hold that against me, but we came to Australia when I was quite a young fellow, but back in New Zealand, my mum's side particularly were into horse racing, and she had a cousin who was an All Black, and I've always enjoyed sport, but I'm built for longer distance and speed. I'm not built for a rugby scrum, but I've always had a great love for sport, some sports in particular. And reflecting as a young fellow, my first hero was Lionel Rose, the boxer. And he just drew me in. In fact, I was going to say I conned my way into his funeral as I was in Melbourne, and at Festival Hall it was by ticket only, but if you walk into a place with some friends and you think you look like you own the place, they'll let you in. So we got in there. But that's just some indication of an enjoyment of sport. I'm not a sports tragic. In fact, sports tragics are boring, I find anyway. But back to the Raiders. I was ordained a priest in 1978, and my first parish was Queanbeyan. And there, the Ferner family. Now, for those who don't know, these will be names that you won't know of. Some will know the family, the Ferner family. Don Ferner was the first coach of the Raiders. His son, Don Jr., is the current CEO, and David was a former player and one-time coach of the Raiders. Those two fellows, when I was a young priest, were actually altar boys in the church in Queanbeyan. When I came back, I'd just come back from doing some study in Canada, and there was a farewell lunch. It's not unlike this, in a club, and I happened to be sitting next to the bloke who was leaving. It was an Anglican priest, and we just got talking, and I said, "Oh, you'd be looking forward to moving on and fond memories." And so, he said, "There's one thing I haven't been able to get someone for." And I said, "Oh, what's that?" He said, "Oh, the Raiders." And I said, "Oh, the Raiders, what do you do there?" And he said, "Oh, for the last year I've had this bit of a role as chaplain." I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "Oh, we make it up as you go." And I said, "Oh." He said, "Are you interested in football?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I am." He said, "Do you want to do it?" And so it literally went from there. Went a bit further. I had lunch with Don Ferner, then CEO of the Raiders, John McIntyre, and the agreement was that they saw it, and it was part of a group called Sports and Leisure Ministry. It was started by a Baptist minister. Some of you here may in Canberra have known of him, a guy called Mark Tronson. Anyway, he started up. He was into hockey himself, but he had a love for sport. And he was very much taken with what Americans in sporting and evangelical circles said: if a sportsman or woman speaks, youth listens. And probably more so in America than here, but the point was that through sportsmen and women, the thought was you could touch a much broader audience than in the pews in a church, if you like. So I went along to the Raiders, and at that stage, I've always been a keen runner, and done a bit of running, so I joined in the running with them because it was just a way of getting to be known. Because who are you? And you say g'day, but having said that, Don Ferner introduced me to the team and said, "Father John's here. He's here for everyone. He's not ramming religion down anyone's throat. He is a priest, yes, but he's here as a person you might want to talk to. Think of a chaplain in the armed services or any institution." And it's not unlike that, because sometimes you have issues off the field with family and otherwise, and you don't want to talk to your mates or perhaps the coach. Perhaps the coach is the last person. But you might want to talk to a chaplain. And over time, there were occasions when that happened. It wasn't happening all the time. 9 times out of 10, the talk was and has been low-key. I'd turn up on a Tuesday night as a rule, because in those days, remember, and this is where there's been huge changes. This is back in 1986. NRL footballers were part-time. They weren't full-time professional. the training techniques and the use of all manner of things, Pilates, yoga, video review, hadn't heard of them. They weren't doing it. Football training and playing and expectation is ramped up big time, big time. And over the years, I've been privileged to see those changes. Don Ferner pointed out to me recently that a game of football, I'm talking here rugby league, Aussie rules of course goes longer, but a game of rugby league goes for, at the NRL level, it goes for 80 minutes. He said it generates 300 hours of media per week across the country through for everything from social media to print media, television, radio and so on. It's the egg that keeps giving, and that's why not only with the NRL but with the ARU and of course the AFL, there's big bucks and the commercial enterprises are behind it. And that too has an impact, because when you have more professional methodology, you have more professional expectations. So I would go along, going back to those early days, to Seaford Oval and join in some running and other exercises and just have some chit-chat. And someone said, well, what do you do as a chaplain? And I tried to think about that, and I thought in many ways you loiter with intent. You're hanging around, but hopefully you're not a bad smell. They get to know you. Because bear in mind, as a priest, by and large, when people come to where I am in a parish, they're often very deferential. Hello, Father, you know, this, that, and the other. Out there, you're on their turf. And so notions of language and etiquette and so on, well, you're on their turf, and that's fair enough. You wouldn't go there if you had a tender ear. But in saying that, when you get fellows on their own, and even in smaller groups, they are quite diverse. You will get a stereotypical footballer, more so in the past than now. You know, he's a bit of a knucklehead and can't be told, and a bit of a Neanderthal, but can play very well, so whatever. But today, to play at that elite level, your natural ability and fitness just won't cut it. You'll just get swallowed up and thrown out. But if you've got that natural talent and ability, and you've got a certain commitment and a desire to succeed and be thoughtful in the club and community, then you will. I heard, just jumping, I know I'm jumping around, but not long ago in the AFL, I forget the club, I might remember later, but one of the AFL clubs rejected some first round picks. Why? Because they thought the character would be disruptive in the club. Clubs are very much keen and aware of the need for a mix. I mean, you look at you guys. If you had someone in here who's dominant or just wouldn't toe the line or whatever, it'd be problems. And same in a football club. So those early days in Queanbeyan were sort of quite heady, because early on after I went there was no connection, but the Raiders had quite a bit of success. They played in the grand final in 87, they won it at 89, in 1990, and 1991, and 1994. And they didn't win, you're correct, they didn't, they got beaten by Penrith. I said they played in it, yeah, so I mean they played in it. And those were heady days, and it was good to be around. But as I said, as a priest, one-to-one, every now and then you'd get a chat with a fellow who wanted to talk about things, including a captain. He came up one day and he said, can we have a yarn during the week? And I said, yeah. And he said, how do you be a captain? And this guy was the captain. And so we talked, and I think he was doing an excellent job. But what he was saying, what do you think about being a captain? What do you think I should be doing? It wasn't really a ground zero question, but it was, how can I improve? And he really wanted to be of service as a captain. 1989 was particularly a good year because, of course, that's the year they won the premiership for the first time. And in many ways, that was not only a great thing for the team, but it was a great thing for Canberra, because some would say up to then, you know, Canberra was seen to be parliamentarians and public servants, not much else. I'm not saying that was the case, but I'm saying there was a perception, and the Raiders, in a sense, made other folk think, well, there are some ordinary people there and that they've got ordinary activities. Prior to that game, I'll share this with you because I penned a little letter. I was in Sydney with some work and I wrote a letter to Mel Meninga and I dropped it at their hotel where the players were preparing for the grand final. It goes back to 1989, but this letter, I think, unwittingly then, but it captures the essence of what I saw the role as, and in fact I've become more convinced over the years. So I'll share it with you. I just wrote, "Dear Mel, just to wish you and the other guys all the very best for Sunday. I consider it a privilege to have been associated with you over the years. These sentiments would be echoed by your families, friends and many thousands of Canberra fans. Simply stated, the grand final is a challenge for you to realise your God-given potential as footballers. Inside each of you is a dream. Dreams do come true if you are willing to sacrifice what you are to become what your dream calls you to be. My prayer for you is that of St. Paul. May your hidden self grow strong. I believe that you are ready for this challenge because you have been willing to pay your dues thus far. Sunday's game will be just another demanding payment. It is simply another game, and yet this game sums up all the other games. In this game you will find out who you are. May your hidden self grow strong. May it be a great game, played in the true spirit of the occasion. Good luck, God bless, and see you Sunday. John." Now, I just dropped that at the hotel, and it does, to me, capture an awareness of the occasion, the sport, but within all of us, and I'm not proselytising here, but I just think within all of us, as Viktor Frankl say, there's a search for meaning and purpose, and it unites. And footballers, they've got a God-given gift, and they put so much on the line for that purpose, and so you can appeal to that. Mel Meninga used that as the base of a team talk the night before. I didn't know this. When I got to the ground, they were warming up, and he said, "When I come back in, can you speak to me, or speak to us, about that letter?" And I said, "About the letter?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh." Now, I'd never spoken to the team literally before a game, because before a game, things are very tense. Before a grand final, So everyone got out of the room except for a few people, including, of course, Tim Sheehan's. And we got them seated, and you could hear that pre-game entertainment outside. And I got them to sit, not unlike this, facing each other. And I said, "Look, you're here because you put the effort in. Within each of you, there is a dream, but you do it together." So I said, "Look into the eyes of the other guys here and affirm that." I said, "You'd call it mateship," and it is. With respect, I'd also call it the movement of the Holy Spirit. You've got something here that's extremely strong. It binds you. And I said, "Don't forget that and give the best of you can of yourselves, because today it's a payback to yourself and to your fans and people looking on to enjoy. And it's your moment. And I hope you play to the best of your ability, and you know that when you come back." Well, they went out, and for those who don't know, they won the grand final in extra time. It had to go extra, and some would say it was the greatest grand final ever played. Now, you can argue that, but yeah, they beat Balmain, they did. But that game, and afterwards, and this is where I'm not proselytising, but as a priest, I think too often we compartmentalize our lives. Yes, I'm a priest, but before I'm a priest or a Catholic or anything, I'm a human being. Therefore, I've got skin in the game with all of you. Now, I might have a certain worldview, and in some ways you might be surprised at that worldview, but I do. And I like to think that the more true we are to who we are, the more we'll find common ground for discussion. In 2016, I was part of a sabbatical, and there was a conference at the Vatican, of all places, because increasingly nations at the highest political level churches and other groups see the potential of sport. And what was affirmed at that conference was that internationally there are a number of languages. The language of science, the language of music, the language of love, and the language of sport. And afterwards, the Australian ambassador there asked if I'd come to the embassy and talk about what was, shared at this conference. And they had some very heavy hitters, from Formula One to former All Black captain and man of folk from all different walks of sport, from Paralympian to the elite level and so on. And I said, hey, look, I'm no expert on sport and international relations. She said, no, but there are people from embassies who want to hear what the Vatican and other places are doing, because more and more sport is seen as a point of cultural currency. I mean, I think it has been for years, but more so. And not the least too in refugee camps, and where you've got refugees. One guy there at that conference, this fascinated me. It was, you think, what do they say, take away what you remember? He had a soccer ball. Okay, big deal, soccer ball. But it could be used in refugee camps by kids all day and all night. It would never deflate. He said, you put a normal soccer ball in a refugee camp, the next day, where's the pump? It's cracked, it's useless. This thing, it was made, I can't remember how he explained it, but it was made such it would keep the consistency of weight and texture and not break. There was another guy in England who had a competition for homeless youth. He called it the Homeless World Cup. And you get all these kids, not kids, but probably young adults, get them to play the soccer game, get FA Cup people to come and affirm them and encourage them. And there's something not dissimilar down in Melbourne with the AFL. They have a competition for homeless people, some of whom in their day might have gone on and played AFL, but their life, things happen, and it didn't happen. I'm jumping around again, but I'll come back to the Raiders. So 89 was a big year, and again in 90, but not 91. But in 94, they got up again, and Mel Meninga, the captain, who was very much synonymous with those early days, he moved on. One of the things that's happened in the football world, besides training techniques and lifestyle of players, is the makeup of the teams. Something like 40% plus of NRL and ARU teams are Polynesian. And those fellows, when I say Polynesian, from the Maori of New Zealand to the Pacific Islands, for them, religion is far more overt than it is for me. So before the Raiders play, there can vary from 4 to half a dozen of the Raiders. We'll gather in the shower block about an hour before the game, and we'll have a short time of prayer. And afterwards, there are a few of them want to do it by way of thanks afterwards. And it's very sincere. I mean, you can have that prayer, and then the coach goes out and tells them about what you're going to do to, and not do, and so on. But there's a mixture. Ricky Stewart said to me one day, he said, what do you think having that prayer time with them does? And I said, nothing. And he said, what do you mean? Well, why do you go? I said, well, sorry. In one sense, it doesn't do anything because, like everyone, they've had their personal goals they've got for this game. They've got the team goals. But I said, what it does, it brings all that together. Because in their worldview, their understanding, this notion of a God who's gifted them as a footballer, and this is an opportunity to use those God-given talents to the best of their ability. That's how they see it, and it brings it all together. I mean, with respect, I would too. But it doesn't change their tackling style or anything. And it's the old story. Heard that one about there's a world title fight, and the bell goes, and one of the boxers blesses himself, and the commentator says, "You think that'll help him?" And he says, "Not if he can't box." so that's it's if I could say God's grace and one's effort. The other thing that's changed, and not just in the NRL, I know this in the AFL and the ARU, is concern for player welfare. We've all seen headline stories of players who've mucked up. It's gone wrong. and it's hurt other people, it's hurt them, it's certainly hurt the reputation of the code. But the NRL is very conscious of player welfare, and they've poured a lot of money into it, and not only for the welfare now, but also helping fellas to transition. One of the big things, if you've been an elite player, and by the way, at that first grade level, on average, it's probably about 3 years at the elite level, if that. Some play, 12, 15, they're very rare. A few get media jobs. Most move back into Civvy Street. It's one thing to be earning 700,000, 800,000 and then it stops and you're on 80,000. Or less. Yes, exactly, if anything. So the whole thing of transition, and I've spoken with players who have been concerned about that because they're moving into a different ball game. Shane Webke, who played for Australia, played State of Origin a number of times, he said 6 months after retiring and working on his parents' farm, he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. His point being he hadn't retired to something, he just retired from football. And I think that's a lesson, with respect for all of us, to retire to, not from, with respect. And players are trying to help other players, and the NRL, as I say, is bringing practical steps. With the young fellows, the under-20s now, if you're not studying or working, you don't play. So the idea, sometimes people think, all these young blokes got all this money and they're sitting around playing video games all day. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but it doesn't happen now. I'm not saying too that some people are not responsible with their money. That's true. But I'd say that increasingly they are. In fact, I remember Don Furness said it was interesting. He renewed a contract with a prominent player, and just in the room as they signed off, he said, you'll be able to get a home with this, or set yourself up with a home for life. And he just said it as small talk. And the bloke said, how do you mean? And he said, well, you've got enough there, you'd be able to put a decent deposit and, or if not buy one outright, depending on how you're situated. And he said, me? He said, yeah. He said, me buy a home? He said, no one in my family's ever owned a home. So, you can be at that elite level of sport, but in other areas of your life, your knowledge and appreciation is quite different. And that also impacts on the expectation of family and friends. I know blogs who's made it, thanks very much. And some guys do get hit by family and friends, and there are cultural issues involved in there too. The group that I'm involved with is called Sports Chaplaincy Australia. As I mentioned earlier, it evolved out of a group called Sports and Leisure Ministry, a fellow Mark Tronson. It's moved on quite a bit from there. And while I've been privileged to be involved with the Raiders since 1986, and there are other chaplains with the other NRL, AFL and so on, Australian cricket team and ARU and V8 supercars and you name it, there are far more chaplains involved in what I'll call suburban grounds, weekend warriors, club games, etc. around the place. And in fact, they're always looking for more because they can be critical incident people just talking about life, people being a point of reference. And I think one thing, as someone said to me once, what a chaplain does, you're the constant. We win, we lose, people come and go, but you're around. And a lot of the time that's all I'm doing. My routine now, when I was younger, I used to go out and join in on the Tuesday nights running and run laps and help out with water bottles and whatever. But now I'm finding, because of my own work, and they work a 9 to 5 day, and they send out a a program for the week, and it's got weights, Group A, Group B, Pilates, yoga, strengthening, promotion, meeting with Ricky Stewart. It's all, so you are at work. It's not just throw a football around, and then you've got to travel and arrangements and all the rest of it. But what I'm finding is that being there and just having a yarn. Because someone once said, in a team or an organisation, most people have a label and a job. You know, you're an admin, you're in finance, you're the coach, you're the guy who looks after the gear. Whereas a chaplain, you're just around. And not only do it mix with the players, but also the admin staff and other folk. And they have babies and problems and issues and sickness and so on. And so conversations will just come up. I could do a lot more. Indeed, if you get with any group of people, you could do a lot more. But what I find is good, it's just a point of contact. I think it's doing some good. I know it's doing some good for me. And I think, as someone said, I'm trying to remember how they put this, that being a chaplain, you're reminding people of things that they're aware of, but perhaps don't necessarily always want to engage with. And they don't quite understand how you fit in. But the first point of it all is get acceptance of yourself. And I knew the acceptance when the Raiders, there were a couple of seasons ago, there was a fellow who was a bit standoffish. I'll just put it that way. You know, he'd sort of walk to it, you'd sort of avert your eyes and wouldn't say g'day. And then one day, he just came up to me before a game and he said, "G'day." That was it. But he spoke volumes. And there's a lot of that stuff in a male environment that goes on, I'd suggest, more than a female. I'm not saying blokes don't talk and all that stuff. They do. But often there are little subtle ways they affirm and seek support and so on. And so maybe that Sports Chaplaincy Australia, just to give them a plug and say that they are doing great work on ovals and courts and whatever all over Australia, low key, and there's training provided, and they've been by and large very well received. From a church point of view, you could say it's really the church moving from the pew out into the society. The forerunner of all of that, though, in many ways, was, of course, the service chaplains, particularly during the Second World War, First World War too, but the Second World War, where they had to engage in an environment that wasn't of their choosing or making, and they had to do it across all manner of lines of divide in society otherwise. And in that sense, that they tapped into that which is fundamental and basic and necessary for community to live. I think we could learn more from the service chaplains. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, they're all of the same ilk, but I'm just saying there's a lot of good experience